The chains cut into my wrists every time the ship rolled, metal against bone. Always metal against bone. Operation Neptune's Fury, December 1944. Somewhere in the Coral Sea, aboard a Japanese prison transport. Corporal James Bronson, 2nd Battalion Pacific Marines. That's what my dog tag said. That's who I was supposed to be. The cargo hold reeked of dysentery and death. 50 Allied prisoners packed like ammunition in a steel coffin. Most had stopped talking weeks ago. Some had stopped breathing. Saito sat chained beside me, his Japanese uniform torn to rags. Enemy prisoner, they'd told us during the transfer. Captured spy. But his English was perfect, and he knew songs my mother used to hum. The hull groaned like a dying whale. Then came the whistle, high, piercing, cutting through the darkness like a blade through silk. Torpedo. Our own sub had found us. "Brace!" someone screamed, but the chains held us in place. The explosion threw me against the bulkhead. Water rushed in through a crack that spread like lightning across the sky. Cold Pacific brine filled my boots, my lungs, my mouth, with the taste of salt and diesel fuel. Bodies floated past me in the rising water. The chains dragged us down, but somehow we kept breathing, even underwater, even as the ship's hull peeled away like skin from a wound. The last thing I remember was Saito's face in the green darkness, his lips moving in perfect English. "We're going home, Corporal. We're finally going home." I woke up choking on sand and seawater. The beach stretched before us, black volcanic glass mixed with bone-white coral. My wrist was still chained to Saito's, the metal warm against my skin despite the ocean's chill. Behind us, bodies rolled in the surf like driftwood. Men from our ship, their faces blue and swollen, their uniforms already rotting in the salt air. "Where are we?" Saito coughed up seawater, his voice hoarse. The island rose before us in tiers of jungle and stone. No birds called from the trees. No insects buzzed. Just the sound of waves breathing against the shore. In and out, in and out. Like something vast and sleeping. I pulled out my compass. The needle spun wildly, then stopped, pointing inland toward the mountain's peak where fog hung like gauze around dark stone. "Pacific Theater," I said, checking my gear. M1 Garand, still functional, though the ammunition was soaked. Field radio dead, crackling with static that sounded almost like voices. Uncharted, not on any navigation maps. Saito stood, our chain pulling taut between us. My orders were to reach Guadalcanal for prisoner exchange. He paused, studying the jungle's edge where shadows moved wrong, too fluid, too aware. "This isn't Guadalcanal." The waves whispered against our boots as we waded toward shore. Something large moved beneath the surface, following us with patient hunger. When I looked back, the water was red. We found Japanese supply crates half buried in the sand. Medical supplies, ammunition, ration tins with labels I couldn't read. But the metal was wrong, rusted in patterns that looked like writing, like warnings. "Your people left these?" I asked Saito as we salvaged what we could. He shook his head. "These crates, they're from the Russo-Japanese War, 1904. His fingers traced kanji characters etched deep into the metal. 40 years old. The jungle watched us work, trees bent at impossible angles, their bark scarred with what looked like claw marks or fingernails. Between the trunks, I caught glimpses of movement, shapes that might have been men, or shadows, or memories. We established basic security protocols: perimeter check every 2 hours, water discipline, maintain radio watch even though the equipment was dead. Military routine was the only thing that made sense anymore. "Truce," Saito said, extending his free hand, "until we reach friendly lines." I studied his face, Asian features, but his eyes were pale blue, like winter sky, like ice, just like mine. Agreed, but first sign of betrayal. "You'll kill me." He smiled, and for a moment his teeth looked too sharp. "I understand, Corporal. War makes animals of us all." The chain between us clinked as we shook hands. Already it felt heavier than when we'd started. Already it felt like it had always been there. The patrol paths kept repeating. Day 2, 0800 hours, grid reference, unknown. We'd been following boot prints for 3 hours, U.S. Army standard issue, size 11, heavy tread. Fresh impressions in the mud, still holding rainwater from the previous night's storm. But the prints led us in perfect circles, always ending where they began. American patrol came through here, I told Saito, kneeling beside a clear heel strike in the earth. Recent, maybe yesterday. "Look ahead," he said, pointing down the trail. 50 meters forward, the same boot prints started again. Same depth, same stride length, same worn spot on the left heel where the soldier must have favored that foot. But there were no prints connecting the two sets. Just 30 feet of virgin jungle floor, as if the man had vanished mid-step and reappeared further down the path. We followed the trail again, and again. Each time it led us back to the same clearing where a single tree grew in the center, its trunk scarred with initials, JB plus M. A heart carved deep into the bark, the wood still bleeding sap. "You recognize this?" Saito asked. I touched the carved letters. My fingers came away sticky with tree blood that smelled like copper and antifreeze. "No, never seen it before." But even as I said it, I could hear a girl's voice calling my name through the jungle. Mary, her laugh bright as spring rain. Except Mary lived in Ohio, 4,000 miles from this godforsaken island. And she'd never called me by my first name. The burial mound appeared at 2 p.m., grid position still unknown. Fresh, turned earth in a perfect rectangle, 6 feet long, regulation, military dimensions. A crude wooden cross marked the head, wrapped with dog tags that clinked in the wind like wind chimes. I approached carefully, checking for booby traps, mines, anything that might explain why this grave sat alone in the middle of virgin jungle. "Recent," I told Saito, examining the soil. "Days, maybe hours." The dog tags were still warm. I wiped mud from the metal surface and read the stamped letters. Bronson, James A. USMC, B-type, 1922. My serial number, my blood type, my birth year. That's impossible. I pulled out my own tags for comparison. Identical. Even the small dent in the corner where shrapnel had nicked the metal during the Bougainville campaign. We dug with our hands, tearing at the earth until our fingernails cracked and bled. 3 feet down, we found nothing. Just more dirt, growing colder as we went deeper, until our breath misted in the humid air. "I don't understand," I whispered. When we climbed out, the grave was gone. Flat jungle floor stretched where the mound had been, covered with decades of undisturbed leaf litter. but my hands were still caked with grave dirt, still stank of decay and fear. Saito's chain pulled tight as he backed away from me. "Your name? How long have you been dead, Corporal?" The fire wouldn't light. Dry kindling, good tinder, matches that sparked correctly, but every flame died the moment it touched wood, as if the air itself was rejecting heat and light. 10 p.m., temperature dropping despite tropical latitude. We huddled together for warmth, the chain between us conducting cold like a lightning rod for winter. Fog rolled in from the ocean, thick and white and moving against the wind. It carried voices, whispers in languages I almost recognized, conversations from somewhere else, somewhere far away. Saito muttered in his sleep, perfect English, words I hadn't heard since childhood. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. My mother's prayer, spoken in my mother's cadence. How could he know that? I'd never told anyone about those bedtime rituals, those whispered words in the darkness of my childhood room. The fog grew thicker. In its depths, I saw shapes moving, soldiers in formation, marching with mechanical precision. Their uniforms shifted between Japanese and American with each step, their faces hidden beneath helmets that gleamed wet in the non-existent moonlight. "Permission to enter?" One of them called out, his voice echoing from nowhere and everywhere. I reached for my rifle, but my hands passed through it like it was made of mist. The soldiers kept marching, their boots making no sound on the jungle floor, their presence felt rather than seen. When morning came, we were alone again, but our boot prints from the night before showed 3 sets of tracks instead of 2. The corpse wore my face. Day 3, 6 a.m. Sector unknown, reality deteriorating. I found him swaying from a vine noose 10 feet off the ground in a tree that bent like a hangman's gallows. Marine combat uniform, same tear in the left shoulder where shrapnel had caught me at Saipan. Same scar above the right eyebrow from a childhood fall. Same birthmark shaped like a crescent moon below the left ear. Same everything. "Cut him down," Saito whispered, but he made no move to help. I climbed the tree with numb fingers, the bark feeling like frozen skin under my palms. The body was still warm, blood pooling in the fingertips, fresh bruising around the throat. But the smell, Christ, the smell was weeks of decay, of meat left too long in tropical heat. The dog tags confirmed what I already knew. Bronson, James A. "How long have I been dead?" I asked the corpse as I cut the vine. His head lolled back, mouth open in a silent scream. But his eyes tracked my movement, followed me as I lowered him to the ground. "You're not dead," Saito said, but his voice came from far away, like he was speaking through water. "You're just remembering." The corpse's lips moved. No sound, but I could read the words, "Help me." I touched his face, my face, and felt nothing. No warmth, no cold, no substance at all. Just the memory of touch, the ghost of sensation. When I pulled my hand away, both our faces began to blur at the edges. Memory hit like shrapnel to the skull. The ship's interrogation room. Bare bulb swinging with the roll of the sea. Japanese naval officer in pressed uniform, his English crisp and formal. "You transmitted Allied positions to submarines in this sector. Name, rank, serial number." That's all I said. That's all I was supposed to say. The beating started with brass knuckles, moved to a rubber hose, ended with electricity from a field telephone cranked by hand. Each jolt lit up my nervous system like Christmas lights, made my teeth feel like they were dissolving. "The maps, Corporal. You copied our supply route charts." I hadn't. I'd never seen their charts, never transmitted anything to anyone, but the accusations kept coming, backed by fists and boots and that terrible electric current that made my vision white out and my muscles lock in tetany. Saito stood in the corner throughout the interrogation, silent, watching. His Japanese uniform immaculate, his face expressionless as carved stone. When our eyes met, he looked away. "Admit your crimes," the officer demanded, "and we show mercy." I spat blood on his polished boots. "Go to hell." That's when Saito stepped forward. He spoke in rapid Japanese, too fast for me to follow, but I caught fragments, coordinates, radio frequencies, times and dates, intelligence I'd never possessed, secrets I'd never known. The officer smiled. "Thank you, Lieutenant Saito. Very helpful." Lieutenant, not prisoner, not enemy. Lieutenant. The memory shattered like glass, leaving me chained to a traitor on an island that shouldn't exist. Burma, October 1944. Operation Thursday. We were ghosts by the time they found us, starved, bleeding, crawling through elephant grass with our ammunition gone and our radio dead. My unit had been dropped behind Japanese lines to disrupt supply convoys. Simple mission, clean extraction. Everything went wrong. The ambush came at dawn. Japanese scouts, maybe a dozen, moving through the jungle like smoke. Our radio man panicked, started transmitting in the clear. "Mayday, Mayday, Grid Tango 77, we are compromised. Request immediate." Sniper round took his head off mid-sentence. We scattered into the undergrowth, but they knew our position now. Mortar rounds walked through our perimeter, shredding trees and men with equal precision. I crawled toward the rally point, dragging Corporal Stevens, who'd taken shrapnel in both legs. "Leave me," he whispered, blood frothing on his lips. "Just leave me." I wouldn't, couldn't. Marines don't abandon Marines. That's what got me captured. Loyalty, honor, all those words they drilled into us at Paris Island. I stayed with Stevens until the Japanese found us both, huddled in a bomb crater that reeked of cordite and fear. Stevens died on the trek to the prison camp. I carried his dog tags for 3 days before they took those too. But now, looking at Saito's face in the jungle light, I wondered, had Stevens ever existed at all? Or was he just another memory, another lie I'd told myself to make sense of the senseless? The burial trench stretched 50 yards through the jungle floor, filled with shallow graves like a mass execution site. Day 4, 1 p.m. Sanity status, questionable. Each pit contained the same inventory: Marine combat gear, M1 Garand rifle, field pack with personal effects, and dog tags. Always the same dog tags: Bronson, James A., USMC. 17 graves, I counted, moving from pit to pit, all fresh, all identical. Some of the graves still held moisture, rainwater mixed with something darker, thicker. The smell rose from the earth like incense from hell. Decomposition, cordite, and that metallic tang of fear sweat that every combat veteran recognized. Saito knelt beside grave number 12, pulling mud-caked objects from the dirt. A harmonica, dented but functional. A photograph of a girl with dark hair and laughing eyes. Mary from Ohio. The same girl whose initials were carved in the jungle tree. A purple heart medal with my name engraved on the back. "These are yours," he said, arranging the items in a neat military row. All of them. I picked up the harmonica, wiped it clean. My lips found the holes automatically, muscle memory playing a tune I'd learned in boot camp. Amazing Grace, slow and mournful, the notes floating through the jungle like prayers. From the other graves came answering music, 17 harmonicas playing in harmony. though the pits held only mud and rotting cloth. The melody wrapped around us like chains, binding us to this place, this impossible moment. "How many times have I died here?" I asked. "Stop counting," Saito whispered. "It only makes it worse." Saito's personality fractured at 6 p.m., splitting like a broken mirror. "Remember Tommy Kowalski?" he asked, speaking with a Brooklyn accent that belonged to my old squad leader. "Remember how he used to clean his rifle with the same rag every night? Said it was lucky." I'd never told anyone about Tommy's ritual, never mentioned how he died at Peleliu, clutching that same rag as blood soaked through his uniform. "You weren't there," I said. Saito's face shifted, features rearranging themselves like clay in an artist's hands. For a moment, he looked exactly like Tommy. Square jaw, Irish nose, that crooked grin that meant trouble. "Course I was there, Jimmy. Right beside you when that mortar landed. Right beside you when everything went white." The chain between us grew heavier, pulling my wrist toward the ground. But when I looked down, it wasn't metal anymore. It was nerve tissue, sinew, and blood vessels, connecting us like Siamese twins joined at the soul. "We were the same man once," Saito continued, his voice cycling through accents, Southern drawl, Midwest twang, Boston Irish. "Before the war split us apart, before you forgot which memories belonged to who." He reached toward my face with fingers that weren't his own, weren't anyone's really, just borrowed flesh wrapped around borrowed bones. When he touched my cheek, I felt nothing. "I'm not real," I whispered. "Neither am I." He smiled with Tommy Kowalski's mouth. "That's what makes this so perfect." The sobbing led me to a limestone cavern that reeked of ocean and death. 9 p.m. Following sounds of distress, standard search and rescue protocol. The cave mouth opened like a wound in the mountain face, dripping with stalactites that looked too much like teeth. Inside, phosphorescent algae provided sickly green illumination, enough to see the source of the crying. Saito's corpse sat chained to a boulder, his body bloated with weeks of decay. Maggots writhed in his eye sockets. His uniform had rotted away, leaving only rank insignia and unit patches. Lieutenant, Imperial Japanese Navy. The smell hit me like a physical blow, decomposition mixed with salt water, fear, and that sweet, sick stench of meat left too long in tropical heat. I covered my nose with my sleeve, but the smell came from inside my lungs, from inside my memory. He's been dead since the ship sank, I realized, speaking to the empty air. I've been chained to a corpse for 4 days. But the chain on my wrist was attached to nothing, just empty shackles, hanging loose like a bracelet made of nightmares. When I turned to leave the cave, footprints in the limestone dust showed only one set of tracks, mine, leading in, none leading out. The sobbing continued, echoing off cave walls, but now I recognized the voice, my own, crying for someone who'd never existed, mourning a companion who'd been dead from the beginning. I sat beside the corpse and waited for dawn, though dawn might never come. My chain dangles empty now, the metal warm against my wrist, like a farewell kiss. Day 5, time indeterminate, isolation protocol in effect. The jungle watches from shadows that move independently of their trees. Every leaf rustles with malicious intent. Every branch points accusingly toward the mountain's peak, where fog hangs like judgment around dark stone. I check my equipment by habit. Rifle functional but unloaded. Ammunition corroded beyond use. Radio dead, crackling with voices that speak in tongues I almost recognize. Field pack empty, except for dog tags that multiply each time I count them. 5 now, 10, 20, all bearing my name, all warm to the touch. The boot prints I've been following for days lead in perfect circles around the island's perimeter. Same stride length, same worn heel pattern, same depth in the muddy earth. But I understand now. I'm not tracking another soldier. I'm following my own path, laid down yesterday and tomorrow and every day that never happened.
Permission to enter?
I call out, following military protocol, but there's no one to grant permission. No commanding officer to acknowledge my request. Just echoes bouncing off jungle walls, reflecting back to me in voices that sound like old friends. Dead friends. Friends who never existed. The fog thickens as I climb toward the mountain's summit. Each step feels heavier than the last, as if gravity itself is trying to pull me back toward the beach, toward the graves, toward the truth I've been avoiding since the moment I washed ashore. But I keep climbing. It's what Marines do. The island's peak opens into a crater that pulses with luminescent fog, breathing like a sleeping giant's throat. Summit reached. Mission parameters unknown. I stand at the rim, looking down into depths that seem to extend through the Earth's core and out the other side. The fog rises in rhythmic waves, carrying voices from everywhere and nowhere. Conversations from my childhood, arguments from boot camp, final words from battlefields I may or may not have visited. Laughter bubbles up from my chest, uncontrolled and inappropriate. Military bearing dissolves into hysteria as I recognize the cosmic joke. I've been searching for friendly lines on an island where I'm the only living thing. Been maintaining security protocols against enemies who exist only in memory. Been following orders from commanders who died before I was born. The laughter turns to sobbing, then back to laughter, then settles into a hollow silence that matches the crater's depth. No voice remains in my throat, no words left to speak, just the mechanical wheeze of breathing, in and out, like waves against an impossible shore. I sit cross-legged at the crater's edge, rifle across my knees, maintaining military bearing even as reality crumbles around me. The fog reaches up like fingers, caressing my face with tendrils that smell like home, like childhood, like everything I've lost and everything I've never had. Time becomes negotiable. Minutes stretch into hours. Hours collapse into seconds, and all of it happens simultaneously in the space between heartbeats. A hand settles on my shoulder with the weight of absolute truth. I don't turn around, don't need to. I know whose fingers rest against my torn uniform, whose presence fills the space behind me like warmth from a dying fire. Report, Corporal, the voice says. Command authority, but gentle, familiar. Mission status unclear, sir. Friendly lines not located. Unit integrity compromised. The words come automatically, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought has failed. Requesting extraction. Extraction denied, son. You're exactly where you need to be. The hand squeezes my shoulder, and I feel the weight of every chain I've ever worn, literal and metaphorical, real and imagined. Shackles from the prison ship, the burden of survival guilt, the invisible bindings that connect us to our ghosts, our failures, our unfinished business. We were never unchained. The voice whispers, and I know it's my own voice, speaking from somewhere outside time and memory. You just stopped noticing the weight. The fog rises from the crater, enveloping me in luminescent peace. For the first time since the torpedo strike, I feel truly warm. The chain on my wrist grows lighter, then disappears entirely, leaving only the memory of metal against skin. But memories, I've learned, are the heaviest chains of all. The mission ended, but I still hear them marching. Phantom footsteps in the jungle, keeping perfect cadence with a heart that forgot how to stop beating. Some islands you never really leave, some chains you never really break. If you've heard stories like this or served near something you can't explain, let us know in the comments. Subscribe for more declassified nightmares.